Hey, Drew, I had a quick question, if you don't mind.
Shoot.
With the advent and and all the exposure now with Zoom and everybody doing meetings, is there going to be any sort of normal longstanding rule that changes the way a person is viewed as in attendance or not in attendance at a meeting? Like obviously for me right now, it's not formally there, even though I'm obviously going to participate. Um, is this bound by kind of state Illinois rules, or is it more of a village rule, or how does that work?
It is this, yeah, statute dictates that you need a physical quorum present. And
And that
so
hasn't been updated or changed at all in the last 3 years.
we looked at that even during COVID. COVID changed that. But a community has to declare an emergency in order to have meetings fully virtually. The village stopped doing that a very long time ago.
Right.
And so, but the village's electronic participation I would say, has been updated in the sense that how we do it now, it used to be like a telephone, a conference phone that we use. Now we can, if you wanted to share, we could see you on the screen, John, if you wanted to show your camera, if you wanted to turn it on. You don't have to.
Got it.
But I would say if we are in if this was a meeting, and we had a physical quorum present, I would ask you to turn on your camera.
Okay, got it.
So that's the nuance. But so the short answer is the village did not need to modify its electronic participation policy because that's dictated by state statute. The only nuance was the governor's order, emergency order, created an opportunity for the village to continue to meet virtually. There are some towns that are still doing that because the order's still in place, but most towns have not, have ceased that. Now, we have maintained this virtual meeting environment, which I don't see the village stopping anytime soon because it is, I mean, like John can travel, people can travel and still be, participate completely in the meeting and see all the exhibits. And, it's been a more complete participation than just a telephonic experience, so.
Right.
Are there three reasons? What are the three reasons?
You can, the electronic policy is personal illness. You can be traveling for business or an emergency.
Okay,
So,
all right. Let's get
so
started.
parking study.
Parking study. You want me to do the introduction of it?
Sure.
Okay, great. So first order of business is discussion regarding the draft 2022 Central Business District Parking Study. The village hired Rich and Associates parking consultants earlier this year to update the CBD parking study, which was originally completed 8 years ago. Drew is going to walk us through the final draft report this evening, and then let's open it up. We can ask some questions and just have a little conversation about it.
Yeah. So, so we, in a perfect world, Lake Bluff this is the second visit into the parking study, and you want to do the study in terms of the methodology on days, like we wouldn't want to do it on the farmer's market Friday right before the 4th of July, because that's not a representative sample of what our parking situation looks like, or on Halloween, but doing it on these days in the middle of the week, but doing it at a variety of times. So I think the next time we update it, we'd probably pick a early springtime or something, March or April or something like that. But to keep doing this and make this modeling more precise, and especially as uses change in our downtown, the more we update this, the better. But I thought it was good, and if you look at the comparative analyses in there, it looks like it was a good model in terms of predicting parking demand and so forth for the community. But I think a big picture summary, the total number of public available parking stalls increased. It was a net positive gain. We knew that. We'd done some changes in the downtown. There were some methodology changes that the parking consultant changed how they viewed other parking stalls. They think it's more clear and more precise, and we agree. We went through that and want to make sure that we accounted for that in the previous study and making sure so our comparisons were able to be apples to apples, and we did that. Noted in the conclusions, there's some benchmarks in public parking that are noteworthy. One is that the proportion of publicly available parking is greater than 50%, and that's true for us. Ours is at 66%, which is great. Interesting enough, the total parking observed occupied spaces was down compared to 2013. that could be post-pandemic hangovers, hard to say, different business makeup. And the overall parking occupancy rate is only about 50% at peak time. So again, that's keeping in mind that the train lot's part of that inventory. Generally speaking, patrons are observing what the signs say and behaving as they're supposed to. We're enforcing. The consultant tells us we could do a little bit better in that regard, and I've talked about that with our chief of police. So we can dial that up a little more. That's always careful line you're trying to walk in terms of enforcement. You don't want to be in a position where you feel like you're shooing people out of town and shoppers and dining folks. So with this study did update one element that was not in the previous study, that was bicycle parking. I mean, I wasn't necessarily super enthusiastic about the parking analysis for the bicycles. It was a little haphazard in the way it was accounted for, and basically said you should invest more in parking infrastructure for bicycles. Okay, don't argue with that. And they made a handful of recommendations, some of them very specific with stall length. I've heard that just anecdotally, that people drive down Scranton and feel like it's pretty, narrow to pass through there, two-way traffic. We talked about enforcement. They said keep up the enforcement. Interesting enough, they did say you may want to consider updating your zoning standard for parking demand for restaurants, which we can talk about that. And really, to me, the biggest layup in here is get that sign changed out at the Metro lot. I mean, that's an easy one to do. Before the meeting, you had mentioned, Joy, about the idea, do we need to do that somewhere else in town to kind of point people to that?
Yeah.
We talked about at the corner right in front of the post office. That was one of the recommendations that Tesca had said.
Yeah.
And I think the ABR at the time was kind of, they were not excited about that. They felt like you could physically turn to the west and see it, and they felt like it's like we don't need more pollution of signage, and felt like that was probably unnecessary. But the experts are saying what you're saying is it would be better.
Yeah.
Because not everybody's from here or may not be familiar with it. So that was one thing that was pointed out with the Tesca study as well, the Central Business District.
Well, and just to add on that, I think there's always confusion with the train lot as to whether or not that's public
Is that public?
parking,
Right.
or if that's permit parking, or how you can park there.
Yep.
So some people will see the train lot and not even approach it.
Right.
Right, because they feel like, I don't even know if I can park in there, and that's probably
Right.
permitted parking. So I don't think it would hurt to have a signage. Maybe we could make it, not
Cute.
super
Yeah,
obtrusive.
yeah.
Or integrate it with an existing sign, so we don't have just this hodgepodge look.
Yep. And then they talk about some advice about start a sinking fund for parking. Interesting, we did share with them a lot of documentation, one of which was the village board approved Block 1 redo, the streetscape program. And they said, hey, if you do that, we think that if you eliminate those parking stalls, we don't think that's gonna have a big impact. So that was helpful. We also shared, for those of you who followed previously, and I know some of you did because we reached out, when the village was looking at redoing the streetscape between Walnut and Oak, they looked at, should we make this one way and add parking? And at that time, the village examined multiple scenarios of the village using existing right-of-way or other village property to add parking stalls, and that was accounted for in this study. That we looked at those, and so those are forever accounted for, that if everybody comes up again, if we really get in a parking jam, break glass, you can use some of these and talk about those. But at the end of the day, those were not recommended by anyone. They kind of felt like that the medicine was worse than the sickness on those. They talk about barrier-free parking, which is contemporary lingo for disabled or handicapped parking. We have the minimum necessary, and they look like they're really underutilized. And so we need to keep them, but that's where we're at with that. I already talked about the bike parking, and the idea for, maybe the village can go out and try to persuade the property owner of PNC Bank to lease us that lot. I will tell you, I have tried that multiple times. When I was talking to the consultant, I'm like, you can put this in there. I've tried, I've asked. There's no interest, but anyway, that's kind of the highlights. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. If questions I can't answer, I will go back and talk to the consultant. The way our agreement was set up with this consultant, they were going to make a presentation to the village board
Great.
At some point, I wanted to bounce it off and share this, you're the first group to see this. So if you had any questions, like, I wonder why they did this way, or I was hoping this would get addressed, or can we talk about these things? I'm looking for comments, feedback, questions.
Well,
Yes.
I'll start real quick. This was originally done in 13. It's been updated in 22. So are you thinking every 8 to 10 years then that you'll have an update done? And
I think if there was an intense user that came in the downtown, that would warrant another deep dive. But as long as the makeup of the business, it'd probably be healthier if we did every 5 years, to be honest. That would be a better timing.
Because what's nice about it is there have been some adjustments made and, these trend lines.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a history major, so I like to see patterns.
Yeah.
And there you can anticipate better what's going on.
Yeah.
And this whole commuter situation, it's hard to know if it's really gonna come back or not, but I know that the utilization of the metro parking for certainly employees has really, I think, alleviated a lot of the pressure on the downtown that I think we were feeling in 13. And it all depends really if commuting is gonna come back or not. Otherwise, I think that's been a huge win, and it's just trying to get people over there using it more, and I think you're right, it's not clear, it's sort of a little ambiguous. Am I doing metro parking, am I doing village parking, what am I doing? But that's something to work out with Union Pacific, but I think that has been really the ace that's been played here that's worked out great. Otherwise, going through I didn't go through the whole report, honestly. Executive summary was where I was, and I didn't really even feel the need to go into the detail, but seems like things are really working well. And it does help with, police enforcement, and because it's all about getting behavioral changes going on, so people will follow the rules. And it seems to be working. So I'm encouraged by what I saw here with these numbers. That's my only real overview.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think my thoughts pretty much the same thing, that does definitely seem to be working. I think communicating more about just as we're saying, the Metro lot. Also, to be honest, it was news to me that the lot on Oak was public. I always kind of thought that was for offices or for something, but if that could be communicated too. I was saying going to a couple of the Bluffinias where we had to leave early and then drive north on Sheridan, I mean, that Metro lot is filled all the way. It's like people really got the message that use it. And, it's filled to North Chicago practically on a big concert night or something, or a big event night. So I think all that's working. And I think it could just maybe be communicated even better, of places where, okay, these are the public places, and maybe we hit it a few times in the newsletter, or we hit it in something. But that's pretty much my thought. I guess.
That Oak Street parking on the west side of the street
Right.
between Scranton and North is a lot. It's a public property. It's all right away, and it is not signed. And the board has talked about doing that. We haven't. The board has not directed us to do that yet. Staff to do that, but that's one of those opportunities where that parking visually looks like it belongs to the adjacent building, right? And that's how people have used it for decades. And so I think the village was reluctant to kind of change that relationship and say, but it's one of those things where the owner of that property is aware that that's not their parking, and that they would have to figure out alternative scenarios if and when the village actually formally signs that, to say these are 4-hour stalls or 2-hour stalls or whatever they are.
Got it.
I would imagine most people parking in that lot that are not working in one of those buildings are going to the coffee shop.
Mostly
I mean, I would think,
residents.
because it's.
I'd say that's residential use,
Yeah.
but
So-
it's interesting that section is what, before the village market was renovated, Walnut had the same thing. It was diagonal parking on the west side, and people utilized it as if it was residential. So, but
There were no competition. There was no competition for the stalls then. right?
well, but true, but also if something happens to that building, that U-shaped building there, and some improvement, then there's the opportunity to better identify that parking.
Yep.
But I might add one thing with the Metro thing that's been a great plus, that's been done over the last couple of years, and that's clearing all that buckthorn out,
Right.
opening up visually, because that was one of the concerns I always had was with the Block 1 building, particularly this time of year, 5 o'clock, it's getting dark. Walking out there on your own, it's not very comforting. And with the lighting and the elimination of all those shadows that used to be in there has been a vast improvement, which makes it more accessible, just visually too. So, you know, hats off to the city, or to the village for doing that, because it makes it accessible, visually accessible. Before, you know, you didn't know what it was over there behind that buckthorn line. So, and I'm all about eliminating all buckthorn, by the way. I have no,
No attachment?
no.
No attachments to
It has choked out so much of the understory of our forests around here, and, but that's been a big improvement there, so,
Good.
makes it work.
So I just had a couple comments, and unless, do you want to go first? Would you rather go? Okay. I think signage for the Metro lot would be great, a little bit more around town. I also was wondering, and I didn't see anything in here about charging stations. I noticed that Lake Forest just redid a couple of their parking lots, the ones off of Westminster there, and I don't know, the cross street. And they put in several charging stations. I mean, we do have quite a few electronic vehicles, you know, in the community now. I don't know if we have the parking, if we can manage that, where we put a couple of charging stations in as you know, and take a couple of parking stalls and do that. But I know we've talked about it in the past, and I kind of feel like that might be something that would be nice to have. It would be a nice amenity to have in town. Again, only if we feel like we can manage, you know, taking 2 stalls out of regular parking and making them more of a charging station. The idea of the bicycle parking, I'm interested to know what kind of racks they wanted. They just said racks.
They just said more. They
Well,
were secure type.
Yeah, the more secure. So I was interested in that. And then I was also interested in the eating establishment parking, because I think we are finding that most of the downtown now is becoming eating establishments. And that's a different feel than a retail establishment, right? People park and they're there for you know, sometimes they use the full 2 hours. So I'd like to see a little bit more of what they, you know, what their thoughts were on that. And that was it for me.
So.
Oh, I had one other too. I was, sorry.
No.
I was interested in the wintertime, if the driving patterns change, because I feel like here in the warm weather, everybody walks or rides their bike, there's a lot less vehicles. But it seems like as the weather starts to cool down, you know, people are driving more because it's cool or it's cold or it's, you know, the weather's inclement. And if that, you know, I wonder if they could do a 1-day study or a 2-day study when the weather's, you know, when it's a little chillier out, and just see if that makes a difference. There might be less cars.
There is some assumptions, and we had a conversation, actually called up John DeRossi about this, because there were some assumptions made about demand for parking during the fall and winter, and specifically the fall, but there is a general assumption that less is needed.
Okay.
And John helped clarify that literally the number of tables that he serves, and you know, after this weather changes, is half.
Okay.
So that was one of the, and I think that was something that was probably more dramatic than even the consultant considered.
Okay.
And I imagine that probably changes, you know, depending on your geography, right? And so, anyway, if I could, I'm trying to share this. The EV charging station, that is something that the village has done certain other incentives for home. The village has reduced building permit fees for persons increasing their electrical systems for housing and charging electric vehicles. They've changed the vehicle sticker pricing for electric vehicles, but the village has not gone as far as to add EV parking stalls. I think that there will be probably more money to do that from the feds, right? Looking for that infrastructure in the coming years. And most people, most planners would say, from what I understand, that folks are more inclined, they're not gonna come in and go to the post office and hook up the car while they were in the post office. It's more, the extended charge necessary, they're doing that at their residences. Now, that may be different for the train station, if and when people go back and leave their vehicle at the train station for extended period, but that's what thus far has been discussed here. Let me see if I can share this.
Yeah, because that's a question, even if you were to consider it, where would you put it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So this is interesting. This is some data this is every EV station in the United States.
Look how many on the East Coast, that's a ton. Early adopters.
But
Do you happen to know, Drew, the cost of putting one in? Are they, is it
yeah, it's here.
$30,000, $50,000?
No, it's less than that. But look at it. About 30% are in California of the United States. I thought it was somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000.
Okay, so not outrageously
No.
expensive.
Yeah, I would think that's an infrastructure question too.
Yeah.
Just,
There was a time very early on, I'm gonna say like 12 years ago, 10 years ago, there were certain entrepreneurs trying to establish that type of infrastructure and had business models that came out. They didn't last very long. And some of those charges get put in and they lasted about a year or two and they get taken out.
And Joy, where did you say you saw them? In Lake
They're in
Forest?
Lake Forest.
At the train station? or-
No, they're in the lots, like adjacent to Market Square.
Okay,
Those two big parking lots.
right,
I think it's the one further north, the one that's north,
okay.
right there on the edge. There were two of them. And I think there's a couple in the other lot too that have been there for a little while. So, I mean, I'm not sure how long people are parking there. I think the limit to park there is 2 hours, so,
once upon a time, I officed above Lake Forest Jewelers, and I'd watch the postal people every 3 hours go out in the parking lot, move their car and go back in. So it was interesting patterns I was watching there. So that's probably where those charging stations are, probably over near the post office area, west of the post office. But,
Yeah.
Interesting.
but,
I just noticed.
people, they do interesting things.
Right, they do. What do you think?
I agree with everything everyone said. Communicating, where we can park. And I'm curious on the Oak Street, what the reasoning was for not making that more clear.
Because it was working. The idea that people are using it, or predominantly the residents of those structures.
Right.
Or that adjacent apartment building, and that the village's parking study indicated that, we weren't, in that particular block, especially, there wasn't a cry for parking. And there was even an opportunity to add parking stalls there, but it would require the removal of those evergreens.
Right.
So there was some heartburn about that too, but I think it was like, we'll wait till we absolutely need to do it. It just because it's never been signed before, right? It was one of those things where there's been a lot of long-term residents in those buildings, and they felt like it would be too disruptive. That's probably the best way to describe it.
Well, I would think the property owner might impact their value too, because of the convenience for their tenants.
Right.
So until something happens there, I would just leave it alone, and then that'll trigger a whole nother series of events. But
And same is true for the PNC Bank building, right? Because there's ideas that you can have parallel parking on that side of the street too. But right now, is it necessary? So why change the curb and spend the money and,
Right,
so
Right.
when the developer will.
let them do it. So, yeah.
Anything else? John?
Yep, I got a few thoughts.
Okay.
First, on the study itself, I wish that they had, I'm not sure exactly how the studies are commissioned or how the consulting firm charges the village and stuff like that, but I wish that they were done over maybe a longer period of time, at least on more than just one day in the middle of July. I think that, we're basing all of the information on one snapshot of literally one day. I think it's difficult to get a large picture of what the parking situation is in town with such a narrow amount of data. I think that there's also differences in what is technically available in the town and what is reasonable for the way that people act and how they're going to use it. And I think those are two different things. Blocks 1 and the metro station lot number 2 and number 9 have a lot of our free parking, but it's not reasonable for most people that are going to spend money in our downtown to park in those places and then walk over to the town. And I say reasonable, I don't mean literally physically reasonable. I mean that people's natural tendencies are not to park 1,000 feet away from where they're going to spend money in the suburbs. And then walk 4 minutes to get there. It's just not the way that most people in our area in the suburbs generally act when they go into a business community. So it'd be interesting to see what the usages are different when we try to, compare it to what are the areas that consumers are most likely to use on a regular basis, and then how much of that is actually open or not. I think that. So anyway, that's just my general thoughts with the study. I did spend a good amount of time reading most of it, and so I think that there's things we can take from it that are helpful, but it's missing a little bit of things, and I think it's missing some nuance with the reality of the way that consumers actually act versus what it looks like they will do on paper, and those things, don't always align. I noticed something out here. I'm out in Colorado right now, and we're in some of the small towns in the mountains. And one of the things that most of these communities do really well is communicate to people from out of town where they can park. Every town we're in, from Breckenridge to Vail to Beaver Creek, all have specific signs that tell visitors from out of town where they can go very efficiently to go in and park. And people use those areas really easily. So I think that the communication part, which a number of people have already talked about tonight, could be really important. Most of our customers, and I think most people that come into town, don't realize that they can park on Walnut. They definitely don't realize they can park on Oak.
Right.
And very few people think about parking on the Block 9 and the various areas that are parking there. So maybe there's a way to create a subtle standard sign with some of our messaging and some of our Lake Bluff marketing on it, that will indicate to consumers, as they come into town, very quickly and efficiently where they can go to park. And we'll have these small signs that are tastefully done, and not just a blue sign with a P on it, but something that's actually designed well and can be a hallmark of the community of where people can go to park if they don't see a slot right inside of the restaurant or the bar or the retail shop they're going to. I think something like that would be really nice, combined with possibly a small map at some area, if people are walking around and they kind of want to see where they can go and find different things. So I think it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to get most of our regular consumers to park in the metro lot and walk over, to park in Block 9 and walk over. So I think if we can communicate better about the lots they have that possibly are more open and more available, then that would, it would at least help with people coming into town. In Navazi, we still have half of our customers that don't come from Lake Bluff or Lake Forest. So they're not familiar with the town unless they've been there a few times before. And I know that at some degree that's true for other people as well. Certainly, we've got a lot of businesses that need more than just Lake Bluff to support them, and we draw from other communities around us. So the more convenient we can make it for them, and the more direct and specifically we can communicate to them about where they can go to park and spend time and spend money in our community, I think that we're all better served from that. That's basically all I had to say.
John, I'm sorry. I was going to say, thank you. Your question about, is this representative sample truly representative? I'll ask, I think this methodology is the same one we followed previously. It's widely accepted. So I think it works. I think it proved itself out. Again, even though some period of time has elapsed, the behavior is still the same in terms of the model seems to work in terms of predictability. But let me, I don't think it would hurt to have more information about it in the study, right? Explaining it and maybe why it works. And that would be helpful, I think. And then the consumer behavior, yes, you're saying, I follow exactly what you're saying, and because I've heard it. If you can't park right in front of the store, your destination, and parking's bad.
Right.
I don't know. I must think there's some sort of explanation that this Rich and Associates has heard before. So let me see if I can find something else on that as well. And then kind of the final one about the Tesca has recommended in the past about having additional signage. Again, the ABR has kind of said, we don't really think that, we think that's more bad than good. And funny that you said the P, something as simple as a blue P. That's what you said, don't do that. That's funny to me anyway. But I think that can be explored, and maybe the way to do it is not as, go, maybe take baby steps, like, get the train lot and maybe the walnut lot and kind of like, see how far you need to go, and pointing out all of the public parking availability without, painting every curb and putting signs up everywhere to the point where it's not as charming, So I hear what you're
Yeah, I
saying.
think there's definitely a balance between that, and I think that actually creating kind of an iconic,
Sign.
almost logo-driven sign would be more in keeping with the community, and stave off some of the, we don't want the 25 signs in town. I think that we can do it well, so that it becomes more of a positive thing rather than just negatively putting up 4 or 5 signs.
Right.
This is a case in point. When I was in the Park District, one initiative, it really didn't go anywhere, unfortunately, but was how to consolidate all the signage for the Park District, primary, secondary, tertiary levels of importance. And I think if we need to get more information out there, we should have that kind of a strategy possibly considered, so we don't get all this smorgasbord signage that there's so much clutter you don't even know what to look at.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, a bigger, more, well, like what was done for the graphics for the village itself.
Branding program, yeah.
But I think,
Yeah.
I agree, John. I think that, there's some opportunities there to try to consolidate our signs as information and still make them aesthetically pleasing, without visual clutter. The other variable, and I know this is something that I remember even with special use permits, that there is always that variable of, if things get really congested, that, valet parking maybe for some of the restaurants here in town would be implemented. But I think that's a backstop that hopefully we don't have to do that. But I know that's something that's in some of those SUP.
It is, you're right. Yep.
So,
Including in Avasi.
well, it was Mabry's.
Yep.
It's a lot of these dining, facilities that, and you're right, retail since 0809 has really become food oriented, or clothing stores are hard to make these days. Thank you, Amazon. So that might be, if things get bad, that's a Band-Aid we could use potentially to alleviate it until we get a better feel for what a better alternative would be. But just put.
Yeah, valet would help alleviate the general parking congestion. The issue with valet is the cost. It would run into Ozzy about $25,000 a year to have valet. We just opened Garassi in Highwood, right next to Miramar, and because of that congestion and how difficult it is in that town, we felt it was necessary to add it there. But we spoke to the valet companies and we combined it with Miramar's valet, so we kind of shared that expense, where the two restaurants can use one company to handle all the cars from all the customers. But it definitely is, it's expensive. It's a couple $1,000 a month to run valet on your busy nights. It's only 4 to 5 nights a week. It's not even every day, and it's not for lunch either. So it is a significant cost to throw on top of restaurants with everything else they have to deal with right now.
I respect that. Ideas are cheap at this point.
Yep.
But maybe it's a collaboration that have to be done. I'm not really sure, but I know that's in the special use permits as far as if for some reason it became so congested.
Right.
So-
Actually, you're right, Rob. Maybe it'd be better if we did it as a group, to contract with a company to handle valet for all the places in town. Like something like that would seem to make sense. We'd probably get a better rate for doing it like that.
Yeah, a collective effort if we had to go there, but we're not going there at this point, I know that, so.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Drew, the parking is standard? The hour, how long you can park is standard throughout the town?
No, it varies in a couple different locations. There's some quick spots next to the post office and in front of soon to be Hansa and Twigs. Yep, yep.
Okay.
We've moved those around depending on the type of uses, tenants.
Okay, I'm just thinking, because I know sometimes when, you're at the Deer Path, elderly people dining there are like, what time is it? I've got to, I don't want to get a ticket, and,
Yeah.
so if that is part, if we go with signage, maybe somehow indicating that in general, it's, whatever amount of time.
All
it is.
those
Most of
stalls
it's
are 2 hours,
most of it are
correct?
2 hour, and it ends at 7. So most people can, they could show up, and so it usually works out,
Okay,
right?
okay.
I'm showing on the screen now the ABR recommended sign for the downtown. That's, I don't know if that's charming enough. It is a blue P, John. But you see it has a little,
It's just shot down.
I don't know if you can see that, John, or if you're calling in, but sharing on the screen. Did we lose him?
I don't know.
No, he's there. Anyway,
I was just going to add that maybe there's a way, I know we're all talking about physical signs, but I think most people coming in to Lake Bluff now are probably using a GPS, they're using some kind of electronic sign, or electronic, navigation system. And I'm sure Waze has some kind of, functionality where you could drop in where your parking is, so as people are coming into town.
populate the base, yeah.
Yeah, they could see, I could park here, I could park here, I could park here. That might be a little more cost effective, and it might also, people might be able to utilize it a little easier.
Right.
I'm not against signage, I think that looks lovely.
okay. All right,
Should we move on?
we can move on.
All right, let's move on. Okay. So next up is a discussion regarding a proposal to evaluate redevelopment opportunities in the Waukegan Road Business Park and the land in the immediate vicinity of the Illinois routes 41 and 176 interchange. The village completed a study of the industrial and commercial corridor business districts in 2000, which resulted in certain comprehensive land use plan amendments. More recently, the village studied the Waukegan Road Corridor, 2011, which yielded several zoning code amendments to help keep tenancy strong and aid in parking lot expansions. Given the current retail climate, limited at best, and the planned interchange improvements, the village solicited a proposal from SB Friedman Development Advisors to evaluate redevelopment opportunities in the Waukegan Road Corridor and the properties in close proximity to the Illinois routes 41, 176 interchange. Our goal tonight is to discuss the scope of the work included in the proposal, and then consider possible recommendations to the village board about proceeding with such a study. I want to add, it was hard to get a study done. It was challenging, which is why it took us a while to all convene back here. So, we have it. And Drew, I don't know if you want to walk through it,
Yeah,
Drew,
I
or-
will. I will tell you. So SB Freeman has done work for the village before. We've used them to do to check other developers' work, so to speak. This, under the village's regulations, we can request additional data or analyses done. So, for example, when Stonebridge came through the planned residential development review process, they presented an economic impact statement on how that development would impact all of the taxing bodies and service providers, school districts, park districts, et cetera, in the village. And so they had a consulting firm prepare a report. The village hired SB Freeman to review that work, and the consultant paid for it. That's part of the process. So we've also used SB Freeman for some, I'm trying to think, we looked to use them in some other instances related to Stonebridge also, but that has been our work with them. I have used them in another community, but they are very well-respected firm. They would work with any planning agency except one, who they view as a competitor. But really great experiences working with them, so that's why I went to them. I think in this proposal, I think the one thing that I certainly sticker shock, the village has $100,000 in its budget right now to do planning work, and that was supposed to be the village's global comprehensive land use plan, not narrowed to these areas, so there was some sticker shock. So when I read this and simmered on it for a while, I spoke with Chair Marquis on this, and my review and recommendation would be to reduce the scope and namely the geographic footprint of the study, because this focused on the Waukegan Road corridor and the 41-176 interchange. And I think the next best opportunities for the village will likely be the 41-176 corridor, since that area is now in IDOT's multi-year plan to actually get redone. And there is some real estate activity. You can see, people seeing if they can find some, pencil out something to make work financially. So there's interest there. So I think to reduce the area of study dramatically, just really focus on the 41-176 interchange, I believe would reduce the cost associated with this pretty dramatically. But I think all of the work elements in phase 1 and 2 are really necessary. And I'll point out number 8 in the phase 2, which is the conceptual site plans. I will tell you that when the village did the Waukegan Road corridor study and had conceptual site plan work we were almost done with it, and we were like 95% done, and in walks Target. And the idea that the village had already gone through all the heavy lifting, it was a joint ABR, PCCBA effort. They had looked at what are the setbacks, how big, and they had gone through all that, the bulk, what could we stomach? And all that heavy lifting was done, so that's why Target could get through in and out of 6 months, right? And they were like, whoa, shocked, but because all the heavy work had already been done, right?
Oh, okay.
So I think to do this for that interchange would be helpful to know, well, what does make sense there? What could the village anticipate doing? But also, half of that area is not even in the village of Lake Bluff, right? So the idea the village would have to annex it and have to be able to present a package that made sense. So they talk about what else you can offer these folks in terms of incentives, what else is, makes sense. And the village would need to educate itself on the, we obviously, staff and our other consultants and attorneys know what we can do legally and so forth, but to really kind of think what makes most sense based off the development community, what do they think will happen there and so forth. So, so I think that would be the key. And so the phases and work elements are right. It's just the study area needs to be shrunk, I think. And I was hoping for concurrence, and I can go back at these guys and say, hey, let's shrink it down and check your math again on the numbers and see where we end up.
Can I add just a little bit to that?
Yeah.
So, Drew and I have been talking to businesses over in the L1 over on the Waukegan corridor, we've been going in and talking to business owners and kind of getting a sense of what they would like to see from the village, what's going well for them, what's, what could be improved. So we are kind of covering that area. We're working with those folks to get a little more feedback from them. And clearly, we don't have a lot of representation here, so we're going to them, trying to get information. So I feel like from my standpoint, what Drew's saying here makes sense. We've already kind of got the Waukegan corridor covered. We're still, we continue to talk with those folks and get feedback from them. And this area, 176-41, that interchange is so kind of raw right now. I mean, we could really use a focused look at that and how we could utilize it. So I do think when I look at this scope that Drew's heading down the right path, that we really want to start focusing in on that one spot. Not that one spot, but for right now, for the scope of this work, that's the area that really would be beneficial for us to look at.
And just one more clarification, the village did do a study there years ago, over 20 years ago. And the idea that the market, the retail universe has changed, as Rob pointed out, thanks Amazon, but the universe has changed about the type of, retail, I won't say it's dead, but it's difficult, right? And so who would really actually want to be coming into this market? What type of uses and tenants? So I think it's just a different world. I hate to say that study's not, bound for the shredder, but it's,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, so I just have a question in terms of that interchange area. Now, it looks like a lot of those properties are working together to market. So what happens if we're investing in a study and somebody comes to those owners, and since they're not in the village right now, there's just the risk that.
And that's always the risk,
Okay.
right? And that's always true. I think the advantage of the village being in that study is that you've got consultant professionals that are aware of they know they're hopefully, if something would happen there, while this was midstream, that we would have a team that's knowledgeable that can help guide the village through those questions, right? We would have a consulting team in place who knows the area, knows this, and says, yeah, that's smart, or no, push this direction. But and again, probably the biggest worry in this is that we're gonna be likely stuck in a negotiation, like go with the county, go with the village, right?
Right.
So, that's,
Does Lake Forest participate on that corner or not?
no.
Even though Knollwood Country Club's right there, okay.
But they will have some say in it because they are the fire EMS provider on that side of the street. So, it's not the biggest worry. The county's more the issue right now.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
And it's, one commercial developer had told me that, yeah, okay, that intersection is in the state's multi-year plan, doesn't make it imminent. And most developers would say there's still a lot of risk, because until it's done or the shovel hits the ground, and they haven't even started phase 2. They haven't made an offer to anybody on any property. They haven't started those drawings, for construction. So it's still IDOT being IDOT, it's glacial, so.
Okay. So now, because I'm still confused on that area, is IDOT looking to impact the?
I can
Yeah.
bring it up.
Pull it up
Yeah,
so
if we
everyone
can talk
take
about
a
it.
look at it.
Right.
Thanks.
I'm still confused about like the Knollwood, old Knollwood Fire Station. Because I know that's being marketed now as part of this collective package, so to say, that's potentially available. And I thought that was gonna be some part of the interchange, but I may have misunderstood that totally.
No, that particular location has been identified for a BMP for stormwater, which is a best management practice. So it could be a bring it up, stormwater basin, but it hasn't been determined. It's still, it's an idea still. Here we go.
John, are you still with us?
I am.
Okay, great.
I'm patiently waiting. Not my strong suit.
So,
You're doing excellent,
so this area here, that the northern structure is the old fire station. The area below it is that existing office and building. This is a hotel, and there's, you know, the residences. But yeah, there's a broker trying to assemble all this.
I think got the last piece,
Yeah.
being the fire station.
And,
Yeah.
and the scope of what we're looking at here to examine that is just that section right there?
I would say it's this.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is what I'm showing you. This exhibit is the preferred plan that the Phase 1 study, when it was completed, this is what the engineers and the community selected as the plan. It is more or less what's there, just amplified, and the biggest pieces to it for safety and just the civil engineering side is that these on and off ramps, I shouldn't say ramps, but lanes, dedicated de-acceleration and acceleration lanes for drivers to safely get on the road. And part of that means that, you know, they're lowering the road and then what's there today and replacing the pump and so forth. But the first thing that the state will do will be this pump station 37. That'll get built. They can't even buy the pumps yet. Still, I think I mentioned this before, it's still tied up with federal procurement regulations. So that's holding all this up, including further north on the railroad viaduct that empties over to the golf course. All that's related.
But I guess
Replacing that pump as
stormwater
well.
Management is working on something now with Great Lakes, widening the ditch up there, or I should say ditch, the north branch of the Chicago River.
Right.
And I'm wondering if all that work being done here, if that's gonna alleviate some of the pressure here, I'm not sure, but it seems to be all flowing down from the northwest, especially with that viaduct up, you know, as you enter North Chicago. But I'm not an engineer, I don't, but it's interesting, they're talking about a pump station there.
Yep. There's one existing. It just needs to be replaced and relocated.
But it's interesting, the Deer Path 41 didn't really work so well last July.
I don't think it was finished.
It's not, it was
It
not.
wasn't finished at
It's
that
not
point.
working
Oh, is that
yet.
what it
Yeah,
was? Okay.
it- yeah.
'cause- Okay.
John, do you have any, I'm sure you have some comments.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. One is, so we're talking about having this study done to figure out what we could do with the area and all that stuff. My question is, how realistically, when is any of this actually going to get done where this study will need to be used? Is this 4 or 5 years away? And the reason why I'm asking that is if it's that far away, which it seems like it might be because everything that our state does takes decades to get done now, then do we need to allocate these resources right now in order to get this done if this is a 5-year away project? That's one thing I was wondering. The second one is, for the cost of this, did we have an idea of what we thought that the cost of this project, of the study was going to be before we asked them to do it? And if we did, is this significantly higher than what we thought it was going to be? And then, is there someone else we could commission to do this that maybe isn't $130,000 that we could still get a wider study? Did we only ask this one firm to bid it, or did we ask 2 or 3 firms to bid it?
So all good questions, and this will be a lesson in local government procurement. So planning and economic development, this type of professional service, they are defined as professional services. So we can't do we wouldn't say here's a plan, give us a price. We can't do that. It's against the law. We can do a request for proposals, say here's a situation, and go through a formal process and solicit multiple proposals from different firms, interview a firm, or multiple firms, and say, we like this firm, just like the village did when we went through the update of the village's planned residential code, and we wanted to we ended up picking Tesca again, but after we talked to multiple agencies, we went back to Tesca. There are not a lot of firms in this space, John. This universe is much smaller. There was the firm that the village used to do Target would have been my first choice. But that firm's principal passed away, and so that's no longer an option, and his partner is left the practice too. But this firm, is highly recommended and is probably the best to do the work. But that doesn't mean that the village couldn't ask for additional proposals from other firms. So we're not precluded from doing that. We just went to what we believe was the best. So to answer your question, we did not have any idea that it would be nearly this expensive. Like I said, we've gotten ballpark figures to do the whole town, to do a comprehensive land use plan for the entire community, and we had budgeted $100,000. So less than this. Now, granted, their dive in what they're doing, there's a lot of time communicating with the development community. It's a different type of activity. We would have expected this to be, ballpark $50,000 in that universe.
For the whole thing.
For this, yep.
For this.
For both or
Just for doing this study, this specialized study of the 41-176 and the Waukegan, yeah.
and Waukegan?
And the Waukegan, yeah. I thought it'd be.
That's what I was
Yeah,
Yeah, the full study.
yeah. So,
Yeah, that makes.
so
So is it worth doing if it's this significant level of expense? You know, how does the village
no,
view
let me,
the long-term gain for this?
Yeah, so an ROI on a study, okay, what does this matter? So for example, Target is generating over $500,000 a year in sales tax. So the idea of being prepared, being ready to know what makes sense for the community, do we think there's a sales tax generator that could come in that area? Maybe, maybe not, but the idea of being prepared and knowing what incentives the village is willing to offer to create development, knowing that this area has been identified in previous land use studies that the village wants to annex these properties because they are going to largely be commercial in nature and generate significant revenue for the village without demanding services, a high level of services. To know that there's always the risk that these properties could be developed in the county that could impact taxing districts within our community, the school district namely. It would be important for the village to try to control those, to try to meet community standards. I mean, that's always a concern. So I think that it's one of those where it is, $50,000 for a planning study, that's not abnormal. I mean, that's not an unusual number. I think 130 was a little bit sticker shock, yes. But I think this is one of those where it would be recommended to do this without hesitation, certainly in that ballpark of $50,000.
Can I ask,
So-
have you had any, have you guys over time had conversations with annexing that area? Is that-
Yes.
Okay, and is there an inclination that that might be something desirable to
Yes,
people who are there?
there is.
Do you think that we can actually pull it off? Because if we do this study and we've got all this great information and we've got a good plan for it, and we don't get the land, then it's all for naught.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd go that far, because you need, I think the more prepared the village is and the better we can work with developers, and because developers, there's a lot of time. They want to know how, there's risk. They don't want to carry properties. They want to tie up resources. Being very prepared is beneficial. Some of these, like the northeast corner where that large office building is, they're going to need water from the village. I mean, some of these businesses, it would make sense for them to come into the village if and when they're redeveloped, these properties. But, I think it's realistic to think they're going to play us against the county. I mean, I know they will. And to the extent that we're more organized, we're more nimble than the county's going to be. But that doesn't mean that they have different capabilities or different expectations than the village does, and that's why some businesses have chosen not to be annexed. And we've talked to all the businesses along the 176 corridor at one time or another. I have, over the 14 years I've been here, and they're in the business, or they know that they're in a situation where they get the benefit of a very prompt public safety response, and they don't have to pay for it, and they know that it's always going to be that way. And so they don't need us for that, and they don't want necessarily to go through our development review process and be held to different architectural standards. It's a little bit easier to get things done in county, and I think it looks like it, and that's
Right.
true. So
What do you think the realistic prospect of us getting the land would be? Just your guess, and then how long of a time frame does that kind of a process take?
Well, for example, it depends how, I think how experienced the developer is. That matters. The village has worked with a handful of developers over the years that know what our process and like our process. It's hard to say, John. That's the hard part. You asked earlier too, the timing of this. I said the state has always gone very slowly. Do I think this is going to happen in 4 or 5 years in terms of what we see a shovel in the ground? I don't think so. Do I think it's within 10? I think certainly 7 to 10 is possible. It depends on what happens. The state is, I know that IDOT is talking about this project, that service road. We've been approached by the state about that service road that in this area here along the railroad tracks. The state has brought to our attention that I had a conversation with them, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, that they were talking about that road and hoping that the village be willing to take jurisdiction of that. And we thought, and I indicated that that staff would recommend that because of the village's goal to annex those properties. We'd want to control the road. So we'll have some tools there to help us with that. And again, like I said, we're a water provider in this area where some of these businesses are still in wells. So that's something they would want from us, so we are closer. That would be a reason for them wanting, that's a very good reason that properties get annexed or become, consolidated in a redevelopment, because they desperately want utilities, whether that be water, sanitary sewer, or the like. That's a very common reason for people to look at us and say, we want to be your partner here.
Okay, so if it is going to be that kind of a time frame, is the study something we have to devote resources to now in order for us to be ready for it, or is it something we can put off for a few years?
Well, here's the risk reward is there are properties, there are developers actively trying to assemble properties for redevelopment right now. Even though it is not likely that this is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, they are trying to do that. But why? Because it takes a long time to do it, right? There's a lot of properties to get under one hat. A lot of agreements need to be made. It takes a long time, and they're going to want, whoever's the investors of this, fronting the capital, are going to want to understand what IDOT's plans are. So all that takes time, and even the village doing studies takes time. It's taken us about 2 years to finish the planned residential development tool. The Waukegan Road Corridor study took, I believe, over a year. I mean, everything takes longer than you think it would because it's a public process. There's a lot of public input. I would venture to say, and here's another thing, is that this plan doesn't involve a lot of public input. I mean, this is their expertise going out, and here's what we think. Right. We're not trying to sell anything. It says this is what the experts think can and will happen there. And we can take that information and use that to develop incentive packages or find out what we need to do to achieve village policies and objectives.
So bottom line, I mean, it's the village wanting to be proactive in this effort, so if something does happen, we're in a position
Ready.
to really be a player.
Just like Target. I mean, that's when you come in and you're going to spend $22 million on a property to develop it, the less money you spend and time you spend going through the entitlement process is a win, right? And so, and that's very important to the development community.
I mean, John, as maybe an analogy in a smaller way, but when the word was out about 10 years ago that North Shore, what back then was North Shore Sanitary, needed to build a tank down at the beach, and the work that would be involved there. On the park board, we went ahead and did a master plan, got out ahead of North Shore Sanitary so that when they started getting serious, the engineers are gonna have to follow what we were thinking, not us following them. So I think that's probably similar here, you know, to get the village in a position where we can be a potential, a lead role.
Yeah, and like I said, developers want to eliminate risk. So they want to come in and say, oh, we want to put in an asphalt batch plant there. How's that meet your needs? No, so, but, they want to know what would the village expect and what would the village want to help facilitate, because they don't want to waste their time either.
Well, and I think we've seen too, like with the Waukegan Road corridor that was done in 2011, like that's still a blueprint for what we're using. And that
Still work to be
study
done in
has-
there, yeah.
Right, that study has, we continue to go back to it, the PCZBA goes back to it, we use that all the time. And I think something like this would probably age well. The ideas in it are basic enough and they're basic, but they're also specific to that location, in the standpoint that if we did it in 5 years versus if we did it in 10 years, a lot of the information would still be relevant, is the feeling I got when I was, reading through it. So I could be completely off base on that, but I mean, the way I see the Waukegan Road when we use that corridor study, we still use it quite a bit. And this could be something similar, since it encompasses that whole general area and what we'd like to do with it.
And a lot of that is, tell me how big of a box can I have? And it's not necessarily I'm going to make a box, but the idea of what's my volume space I can develop, that helps me understand how much square footage I can monetize.
So the issue for the village right now is the price tag. And try to maybe bring the scope down.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
To say, like, what's a
Yeah,
price
I think
we'd be
it's, if you
comfortable
agree,
with?
yeah, try to, we'll just have to get to the point where we feel like this is a reasonable price based off the hourly rates for these types of professionals, and is it, and frankly, John, you asked, who else can we go out and you would have to assemble an odd group of team members to put together a firm that could provide all the expertise in this, and even SB Friedman is going to bring on an outside planning firm and Christopher Burke Engineers to help do this. Why? Christopher Burke Engineers did the phase 1 study, right? There was the engineers who went through the process, who designed what you see there. They're the experts. They can talk about traffic. They can talk about how much stormwater basins need to be, where they know all that. So they know they need to go to that firm because they're the knowledgeable partner.
Is this something Tesca could quote if we really want to?
They're
give
the
separate
competitor that
quote?
they don't want to work with.
Okay. Just
That's
if we
the one
want to
rub.
get a competing quote,
Yeah.
okay.
But they would have to bring a team in too. But they would have to bring in the financial advisors and the development side of the equation, which SB Friedman is the experts. That's
And about how long, did I miss that in the thing? If we shrink the scope down so that it's focused on one area, do you have any sense how long the study would take?
That's a good one. By shrinking it, I would have to go back and ask them about, I think it would be a shorter timeline. Because they talk
How long
about
was the original timeline for the whole thing, Drew?
6 months.
Okay, no, not too bad.
And I'm ballparking this. I mean, it's probably, I'm guessing it's closer to 12 months, just because it's easier to write 6 months. Oh, that looks good. So reality
Wait, they
sets
told
in.
us 6 months, but do you think it's gonna be 12?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't, sounds like Freeman has a really great deal. They're one of the only people that do what they do. They can charge basically whatever they want, and they can tell you 6 months and take 12.
Well, whatever the village would agree upon, they would be, contractually obligated to work within that time frame.
Right.
So it's just a matter of, just like I said, everything takes longer than you think, so.
So, and
Yeah.
in the report that you would end up getting, there would be some competitive advice on how to position the village when developers are looking at Lake County versus,
For
I mean, is
annexation.
that part of it?
Yeah, the 9 is develop develop development strategies.
Okay,
So based on market research and barriers to redevelopment, business attraction, they'll develop strategies to leverage the village's resources. And talk about partnerships, public-private partnerships, which, could be the state, could be, others. And I did reach out to IDOT about this, and said, if it would help facilitate all this, is that maybe we can do this study, because they still try to figure out where they put this best management practice for stormwater, right? The idea that if we came up with a plan versus an engineer drawing a rectangle in the middle of a footprint,
Right.
we can find a better place to put it that can meet all the needs and provide a much bigger footprint for a development site, right? So let us, to Rob's point earlier, we can help dictate the plan.
okay.
Ron, did you have any comments? You're kind of an island to yourself.
No, that was,
Okay. I just wanted to make sure you didn't have anything you wanted to add.
Interesting.
Any other thoughts?
So again, going back to Waukegan Road corridor, you look at the time when this phase one was done, Target was being constructed, right? You can see the site says this site under construction. That plan, I think there were like 3 potential concept site plans that Tesca had drawn up for that site. This was pretty close to one of them. So that, a developer says, I'll do that. You've already said that's okay, I'll just do that one. And so that means that just things became down, okay, well, how tall? Okay, that's good, It really expedited the process.
Okay.
Is there a reason why we didn't get a quote from Tesco? I'm just curious.
There is, my opinion is that SB Freeman brings the financial and business development acumen to the table. That's their specialty, and that's the most critical piece to this.
Okay.
I think if we asked for, Tesca would be the planner, and that they would find a partner for that.
Okay. Can you go back and see what the pricing would be with us?
I think, I have no problem doing this, is that I could reduce the area of study to the interchange. I could go back and tell SB Freeman that, and tell them, here's the planning partner, because they said whoever you want to use, we can say, okay, does this change? You'll get more specificity so they can understand those rates, so that maybe we get much more clarity about who's the players. Then go back, ask Tesca, here's the same request, here's the scope, give me a number. We can do that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to just cut it in half and then have them give us a bill for 65 grand. We're still spending as much to get, what we've gotten before. So I think the idea would be to spend less if we're going to cut it in half, but not just cut the price in half. Otherwise, we're just giving them what they're asking for now. We're just getting half the study.
Right.
I don't know if I followed you on that.
You're cutting the.
If we go to Friedman and tell them cut the study in half and they give us a bill for 65 grand, that doesn't really work, because we're getting half the study and we're still paying them as much for the amount of work they're doing.
He's saying try to.
We're not going to spend 130 grand, but we're also not going to get a full study.
I understand, right, but that is the magic of getting proposals. They usually don't. We can ask for more. Well, they broke out the number of hours and time in the budget estimate. You can see that on table 5.
Yeah, I was looking at that.
That's about as specific as it gets. I mean, you see the biggest element of this is their work and not the planning and engineering work, right?
Right. I guess what I mean is, if the 130,000 is too much for us to stomach for the amount of work they're doing, then 65,000 for half the work should equally be difficult to stomach.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Okay.
Let's go back and see what they say.
Yeah.
Let's do that, and let's, if we need to, let's get a second quote from Tesca so that we can compare. So that we
Yeah,
can
and then the other
compare.
thing with procurement, you're not supposed to base professional services on pricing. Just so you know.
We're not supposed to consider how much money we're spending of the
It's
taxpayers'
professional,
money?
this is Illinois. So,
I don't understand. So we're responsible for
yeah,
advising how much we
Yeah.
should spend, but we're not supposed to consider how much we're spending.
I mean, you can say no, you can modify the concept.
I don't understand this at all.
So,
But this is still plus the 100,000 that is for the other,
the village still intends to do the comprehensive land use plan
Yes.
update.
okay,
Right.
so
Right.
that's not
That's
taking away
different.
from that.
This would be an appendix to that study.
Okay.
Right? Just like
Got
the
it.
central business district study and even the parking study and the village's sustainability plan will all be appendices to the
Okay.
overall land use plan.
Got it.
The village has a land use plan. It's just, it's the core of it is back from 98, 97 when it was adopted. There's been amendments to it over time, and actually the village board finished adopting the most recent amendment related to its planned residential development. You guys did that on Monday night.
We did.
So it was updated as recently as this week. So,
Can I just?
It's your show.
Say something, John?
Yeah.
So John, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think, before I was on the board, I was in the private sector, and there's just a difference between how you can do things in the private sector and how you can do them in the public sector, and I agree with you. Sometimes logically, it doesn't make sense when you're coming from one sector to the other. So I feel your pain. Some of these things are dictated based on legal reasons or how the state, legally, how we have to do things. Your hands are kind of tied. So, but I just wanted to let you know, like, when I first came on the board, I had those same kinds of questions and conversations, and it doesn't always, sometimes it defies logic, but it's the way we have to follow the protocol based on legal. Probably not the answer you're looking for.
No, I understand that we have to do certain things based on certain rules, but I think that probably explains exactly why we have all the problems we have.
Probably.
some of them, not all of them.
All right, are we comfortable? Are we comfortable moving on then?
Yes.
Good, okay. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the, that's the discussion regarding the proposal. Let's go to the next thing. Continued discussion regarding the evaluation of the economy of the village and actions to promote the economic health of the business community. At our last meeting, way back in February 2020, we reviewed the draft Economic Development Strategy Report that Drew put together with the input of this group. The goal this evening is to prioritize the various economic development strategies included in the updated draft report and to make any necessary changes. I think from the standpoint of if everybody read through this document, Drew did a great job of really distilling down all our comments and making this document pretty tight. So if you have some wordsmithing, or if you, actually, any comments you have are completely welcome. If you want things added in or removed, we can certainly look at that. If you have any kind of wordsmithing, sometimes people are particular about a word that's used, we can look at that. But the goal here is at some point to finalize this and send it to the village board to take a look at.
You know, and the only thing I would add to that, if it's all right,
Sure.
one is, one of the strategies may be, after the next meeting is, and maybe the thing to do is wait to get everybody, if people have, one-for-one comments, they can forward them to me, I can incorporate them, since we don't have the full complement of the board here tonight.
Right.
One thought, the second thought would be that, once we feel comfortable about this, maybe one of the priorities is to do this study, recommending this study that we're talking about, to add that, because that's not in here.
Oh, okay.
Right, to, roll that into this too, but that's kind of maybe another reason to hit the pause button, but, anyway, those are just the quick thoughts, is maybe don't have to spend any time on this tonight, other than hand me, if you have comments, I'll take them.
Yeah, why don't,
Expect an email from you.
does anyone have any, I had just, right in the beginning, in the acknowledgements, we've got to take Kate out as,
Yep.
it's a very, little.
Fresh.
Small thing, yeah. John, did you have any comments?
I do. I'm typing them up. It won't be a lot, but I'm going to type them up and send them over to Drew, so he's got everything in writing.
Okay, great. Rob, how about you?
Not right now. No, nothing
Nope.
to share at this point.
Okay. Ron?
Nope. Good.
I thought it was a nice distillation of all the information, so thank you.
Okay,
Very good.
all righty.
So the goal on this one is to write down our comments, send them to you if we have any.
Yep, and then we'll revisit at the next meeting.
Okay, and then we'll add in, if we decide to go forward with
Yep.
the,
41-176?
we'll add that in.
Yep.
Okay. Do I have to
I mean, that's,
adjourn us, or are we?
we can say we're done. I don't have anything else to
Formal
add from the
here.
administrator's report, right?
I don't have anything either. Does anyone else have a report that they might like to share with the group? Do I have to actually do an adjournment, or?
No, we can say meeting's over.
Meeting's over. Thank you. All right.
Thanks,
We're all
John.
done. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Okay.
I'm running out of gas.